The gunshot that killed her husband echoed through the saloon, and Faith Delaney knew her life would never be the same, but she refused to let anyone see her cry. She stood in the dusty street of San Diego, California, on that scorching August afternoon in 1878, watching them carry Thomas's body away while the townspeople whispered behind their hands. Her cotton dress stuck to her skin, sweat mixing with the tears she would not shed publicly. The man who had pulled the trigger claimed self-defense, said Thomas drew first, and the marshal believed him because Thomas had been drinking again. Faith knew the truth, but truth held little weight for a widow with no money and 3 mouths to feed. 2 days after they buried Thomas in the hillside cemetery overlooking the ocean, Faith walked into the Golden Spur Saloon and asked the owner, a gruff man named Henderson, for work. He looked her up and down, taking in her widow's black dress and the determined set of her jaw, then jerked his head toward the back rooms. She understood what he was offering. She shook her head and pointed to the bar. Henderson laughed, but something in her eyes made him reconsider. He agreed to let her serve drinks and food, nothing more. The pay was barely enough to keep her children fed, but it was honest work, and Faith clung to that. The whispers started immediately. Respectable women did not work in saloons. Respectable women stayed home and mourned properly. Respectable women found a new husband quickly, or moved back east to live with family. Faith had no family back east, and she would be damned before she let another man control her fate so soon after burying the last one. She held her head high when she walked through town, ignored the pointed looks and hushed comments. Her children, 2 boys aged 7 and 5 and a daughter just 3 years old, needed food and shelter. Nothing else mattered. Minister Crawford made his opinion known on the first Sunday after she started working at the saloon. Faith had brought her children to church, same as always, settling into a pew near the back. She felt the cold shoulders, saw the empty spaces that opened up around her family like a disease had infected them. Minister Crawford mounted the pulpit, his black coat severe against his thin frame, his face angular and hard. He was a man who had come west to save souls and found mostly sinners to condemn instead. His sermon started simply enough, speaking of righteousness and the narrow path to salvation. Then his voice rose, filling the small wooden church with fire and brimstone. He spoke of women who led men astray, of Jezebel and her painted face, of those who sold their virtue for coins. His eyes found Faith in the congregation and stayed there. She felt her face burn but refused to look away. Her daughter squirmed in her lap, and her sons sat rigid beside her, too young to understand fully but old enough to sense the anger directed at their mother. "There are those among us," Minister Crawford proclaimed, his finger pointing like the sword of judgment, who claim to be decent while working in dens of sin and corruption. A woman who serves whiskey to drunkards is no better than the woman who sells her body. She enables vice. She profits from the destruction of souls. She is a sinner, plain and simple, and she pollutes this community with her presence. Faith stood then, slowly and deliberately. She met the minister's eyes across the crowded church. Without a word, she gathered her children and walked down the center aisle, her footsteps loud in the sudden silence. No one moved to stop her. No one spoke in her defense. She pushed open the church doors and stepped into the bright California sunshine, breathing deep to steady herself. Behind her, she heard Minister Crawford resume his sermon, his voice triumphant. She was still standing outside the church, trying to decide what to tell her children when they asked why they left, when she heard a second set of footsteps on the church steps. She turned to find a man she had seen around town but never spoken to. He was tall, weathered by sun and work, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty range clothes and a gun belt, and he held his hat in his hands as he approached her. "That was the biggest load of horse manure I have ever heard in my life," he said, his voice low and rough. "Pardon my language in front of the children, madam, but that man in there does not know the first thing about courage." Faith stared at him, caught off guard. "I do not believe we have been introduced." "Wade Quinlan," he said, offering his hand. She shook it, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and long days. "I work at the Morrison Ranch, breaking horses mostly. Been in town about 3 months now. Faith Delaney." She glanced at her children, who were watching this stranger with wide eyes. "These are my sons, Daniel and Joseph, and my daughter, Mary." Wade crouched down to the children's level, his face softening. "Pleased to meet you all. Your mother is a brave woman. You should be proud of her." "Why did the minister say those things?" Daniel asked, his voice small. At 7, he understood more than Faith wished he did. Wade looked up at Faith, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded slightly. He turned back to Daniel. "Because some people think the world should work a certain way, and when it does not, they get angry. Your mother is doing what she needs to do to take care of you. That takes more strength than most people have. The minister, he is just afraid of strong women." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to Faith in weeks. She felt something crack in her chest, but she held steady. "Thank you, Mr. Quinlan. That is generous of you to say. It is the truth." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I come to the Golden Spur most evenings after work. You serve the best coffee in town, even if you are working in a saloon. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Faith standing there with her children, feeling something she had not felt since before Thomas died. Hope, maybe. Or just the knowledge that somewhere in this judgmental town, one person saw her as she truly was. Wade Quinlan kept his word. He showed up at the Golden Spur every evening just after sunset, ordered coffee and whatever dinner Faith recommended, and sat at a corner table reading the newspaper or talking quietly with the ranch hands. His presence changed something in the saloon. The rougher customers watched their language when Faith came near. The men who might have tried their luck with the new widow thought twice when they saw Wade's steady gaze following her movements. Faith told herself not to read anything into it. Wade was just a decent man, the kind who helped people because it was the right thing to do. She had been married for 8 years. She knew what it meant when a man paid attention to a woman, and Wade was not doing that. He was just being kind. She needed to focus on her work, on keeping her children fed and clothed, on building a life from the ashes of the one she had lost. But she noticed things anyway. The way Wade's eyes crinkled when he smiled at something her young daughter said when Faith brought Mary to work on days when the neighbor woman could not watch her. The way he always left coins on the table that added up to more than his meal cost. The way his hands moved, competent and gentle, when he helped her carry a heavy crate from the storage room one busy Saturday night. "You do not have to keep defending me," Faith told him one evening in late September, 6 weeks after they first met. The saloon was quiet, just a few regulars playing cards in the corner. Wade was finishing his coffee, and Faith had a rare moment to sit down. Her feet ached from hours of standing, and she had burned her hand earlier on a hot stove. She had wrapped it in a cloth, but it throbbed. "I know I do not have to," Wade said. "I want to." "Why?" Faith asked, genuinely curious. "You do not know me. I could be everything the minister says I am." Wade looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes serious. "You are up before dawn to get your children fed and dressed. You walk them to the neighbor's house. Then you come here and work until late in the night. You smile at customers who do not deserve your kindness. You send most of your wages to pay for your children's care and never spend a penny on yourself. Your dress is mended in 3 places, and you have worn the same boots for so long there are holes in the soles. You could have made different choices, easier choices, but you did not. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks. You have been watching me. Yes, Wade admitted without shame. I have. Why? She asked again, but this time the question meant something different. Wade leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Because you are the strongest person I have ever known myself, and I cannot seem to look away. Faith's breath caught. No one had ever called her strong. Thomas had called her stubborn, difficult, too independent. Her mother had called her foolish for marrying a man who drank. Minister Crawford called her a sinner, but Wade looked at her and saw strength. She did not know what to do with that. I am not strong, she said quietly. I am just trying to survive. That is what strength is, Wade replied. Surviving when it would be easier to give up, getting up every day and facing a town that judges you, choosing the hard path because it is the right one for your children. That is real strength, Faith, not the kind that comes from a gun or physical power, the kind that comes from in here. He tapped his chest over his heart. Faith looked down at her hands, rough and red from work. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she was more than what Minister Crawford said, more than a scandalous widow working in a place decent women avoided. When she looked up, Wade was still watching her, patient and steady. I should get back to work, she said, standing. Her legs felt unsteady. Wade nodded, but before she could walk away, he caught her wrist gently. His touch was warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Faith, I am not a man who says things I do not mean. I meant every word. She believed him. That was the dangerous part. The autumn days grew shorter, and Faith found herself looking forward to Wade's evening visits more than she wanted to admit. They talked about simple things, safe things. He told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, learning to ride before he could properly walk. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about coming west with Thomas when they were both young and full of dreams, before the drinking started, before those dreams turned to dust. Wade never pushed for more than she was willing to give. He never asked to court her properly or suggested anything improper. He was just there, solid and dependable, like a lighthouse in a storm. Faith started to rely on that presence, and it scared her. She had relied on Thomas once, and look where that had led. In late October, trouble came to the Golden Spur in the form of a cattle drive passing through town. The cowboys were loud, drunk, and looking for entertainment. Faith served their drinks with practiced efficiency, dodging grasping hands and ignoring crude comments. She had dealt with worse. But one man, bigger than the others with a scar across his cheek and mean eyes, decided he wanted more than drinks. He grabbed Faith's arm as she passed, pulling her toward him. Come sit with me, darling. I have money, and you look like you could use some company. Faith pulled back, keeping her voice calm. I am just here to serve drinks, sir. Please let go of my arm. The cowboy laughed, his grip tightening. I heard you are a widow. Widows get lonely. I can help with that. The lady asked you to let go. Wade's voice cut through the noise of the saloon, quiet but carrying an edge like a blade being drawn. The cowboy looked up, still holding Faith's arm. This is not your concern, friend. It is my concern when you put your hands on her after she asked you to stop. Wade had risen from his table and now stood a few feet away, his body relaxed but ready. Faith knew enough about men and violence to recognize the danger in that stance. Wade, it is fine, Faith said quickly, trying to defuse the situation. Please, I can handle this. I know you can, Wade said, his eyes never leaving the cowboy. But you should not have to. The cowboy released Faith's arm and stood, swaying slightly. He was drunk, but not so drunk that he could not recognize a challenge. "You think you are tough, cowboy? I think you should apologize to the lady and leave," Wade said evenly. What happened next occurred so fast that Faith barely registered it. The cowboy swung. Wade ducked, caught the man's arm, and used his momentum to send him crashing into a nearby table. The other cowboys from the cattle drive surged to their feet. Wade's hand moved to his gun, and suddenly everyone in the saloon was armed and tense. "Enough!" Henderson's voice boomed from behind the bar. He held a shotgun, pointed at the ceiling but ready. "You cattle pushers, get your friend and get out. You are not welcome here anymore." "Wade, put the gun away." The cowboys grumbled but complied, hauling their friend to his feet and heading for the door. The one with the scar shot Wade a look that promised future trouble, but Wade stared back until the man looked away. When the saloon doors swung shut, Henderson lowered the shotgun and nodded at Wade. "Thanks for that," Henderson said, "but next time, try not to start a fight in my place." "Yes, sir," Wade said, holstering his gun. Faith found she was shaking. She pressed her hands flat against her apron, trying to steady herself. Wade crossed to her immediately, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not touching without permission. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, I am fine." "You should not have done that. They could have shot you." "They could have hurt you," Wade countered. "That was not acceptable." "I have dealt with drunk cowboys before, Wade. I can take care of myself." "I know you can." His voice was gentle now, the edge of danger gone. "But that does not mean you should have to face everything alone. Let someone help you, Faith. Let me help you." She looked up at him, at the concern in his gray eyes, at the way he stood close enough to protect but not so close that he crowded her. Something shifted in her chest, a wall crumbling that she had built carefully after Thomas died. She had told herself she did not need anyone, that relying on herself was the only safe choice. But here was Wade, asking nothing in return, just offering his presence and protection like a gift she could accept or refuse as she chose. "Why?" she whispered, asking the question that haunted her. "Why do you care so much?" Wade smiled, soft and a little sad. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth caring about. And maybe because I am halfway in love with you, and I have been since the day you walked out of that church with your head held high." Faith's breath stopped. No one had said those words to her in years. Thomas had loved her once, she thought, but he had stopped saying it long before he died. And here was Wade, standing in a rough saloon with a gun on his hip and truth in his eyes, telling her something she had not dared to hope for. "You do not know me well enough to love me," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "I know that you are brave and kind and fiercely devoted to your children. I know that you work until your hands bleed and never complain. I know that you face judgment and condemnation every day and refuse to let it break you. I know that when you smile, really smile, it is like the sun coming out. What else do I need to know?" Faith felt tears prick her eyes, the ones she had held back for so long. "I am a mess, Wade. My life is complicated. I have 3 children and no money and a dead husband who left me with nothing but debts and shame. I work in a saloon and the whole town thinks I am a fallen woman. I do not have anything to offer you." Wade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough against her skin, warm and solid. "You have everything to offer, Faith Delaney. You just cannot see it yet." He leaned down and kissed her then, gentle and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Faith froze for a heartbeat, then melted into the kiss, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. It had been so long since anyone touched her with tenderness, since anyone made her feel like she mattered. When Wade pulled back, she was breathing hard, and tears were sliding down her cheeks. "I am scared," she admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. "I am so scared, Wade. What if I let myself feel this and it all falls apart? What if you see who I really am and decide I am not worth it? Then I will prove to you every day that you are wrong," Wade said, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "I am not Thomas Faith. I do not drink, I do not gamble, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. If you let me, I will show you what it means to be loved by someone who sees your strength and admires it instead of feeling threatened by it." Faith wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. She had been strong for so long, held everything together through sheer force of will. The thought of sharing that burden, of having someone stand beside her instead of behind her or in front of her, was almost too much to comprehend. But Wade was offering, and she was tired of being alone. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to let someone in." "We will figure it out together," Wade promised. "We have time, Faith. I am not going anywhere." Over the following weeks, Wade became a constant in Faith's life. He started showing up earlier in the evenings, helping her with the heavy lifting before the saloon got busy. He walked her home after her shifts ended, even though it was late, and he had to be up before dawn to work at the ranch. On Sunday mornings, when Faith no longer attended Minister Crawford's church, Wade took her and the children on picnics by the ocean, spreading a blanket on the sand and letting the children run wild while he and Faith talked. The townspeople noticed, of course. The whispers changed from condemning Faith for being a saloon worker to speculating about her relationship with Wade. Minister Crawford gave another sermon, this one about unmarried people engaging in sinful relationships. Faith ignored him. She had learned that the minister's opinion mattered far less than she had once thought. What mattered was the warmth in Wade's eyes when he looked at her. The way her children had started calling him Mr. Wade with affection in their voices. The feeling of safety she experienced when he held her hand. In November, Wade asked Faith to dinner at the small boarding house where he rented a room. She arranged for the neighbor woman to watch the children for the evening, put on her one good dress that was not black, and let Wade escort her through town. People stared, but Faith found she did not care anymore. Let them stare. Let them judge. She was done living her life according to their expectations. Wade had arranged for the boarding house owner to prepare a meal, and they ate in the small parlor, seated at a table by the window overlooking the darkening street. It was the most romantic thing Faith had experienced in years. This simple dinner with a man who listened when she spoke and laughed at her dry observations about saloon customers. After dinner, Wade led her to the small porch outside where they could see the stars beginning to appear in the clear California sky. "I have been thinking," Wade said, his hand warm around hers, "about the future, about what I want from my life." Faith's heart beat faster. "What do you want?" "I want a spread of my own. Nothing huge, just enough land to raise horses and maybe some cattle. I have been saving money for years and I am close to having enough for a down payment." He paused, turning to face her fully. "I want a family, Faith. A wife who is my partner, not just someone to cook and clean, children to teach and watch grow, a home that is filled with love instead of just existing." "That sounds wonderful," Faith said, meaning it. "You will make that happen, Wade. You are the kind of man who achieves what he sets out to do." "I want to make it happen with you," Wade said, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "I know it is soon. I know you have been through hell and back, but I love you, Faith. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you love your children with everything you have. I love how you make me laugh and how you face the world with courage even when you are scared. I want to build that life with you if you will have me." Faith stared at him, her mind racing. This was everything she had stopped letting herself dream about, a partner who respected her, a man who saw her children not as obligations but as part of the package he wanted, a future that held more than just survival. But fear clawed at her, the same fear that had kept her walls up for months. "What if I am not strong enough?" she whispered. "What if I fail you or fail my children by making the wrong choice again?" Wade pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "You will not fail. And even if things get hard, we will face them together. That is what marriage should be, Faith. Two people standing side by side, supporting each other. I am not asking you to be perfect. I am asking you to let me love you, flaws and fears and all." Faith tilted her head back to look at him. In the dim light from the boarding house windows, his face was all planes and angles, but his eyes were soft with emotion. She thought about Minister Crawford calling her a sinner, about the townspeople who judged her, about all the voices that told her she was less than she should be. Then she thought about Wade calling her the strongest person he had ever known, about the way he had stood up for her and protected her and seen her true self beneath all the hardship. "Yes," she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. "Yes, I will marry you, Wade Quinlan." His smile was brilliant, transforming his weathered face. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Faith kissed him back with all the love and hope she had kept locked away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I promise I will spend every day proving you made the right choice," he said. "I already know I did," Faith replied, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly happy. They married in December, a small ceremony performed by the Justice of the Peace with Henderson and the neighbor woman as witnesses. Faith wore a simple blue dress that Wade had bought for her, the first new clothing she had owned in years. Her children stood beside her, Daniel and Joseph looking proud in their Sunday clothes, Mary clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. Wade wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Faith tenderly, and her children cheered. Minister Crawford heard about the wedding, of course. The following Sunday, he gave yet another sermon about sin and redemption, about how some people were beyond saving. Faith heard about it from other saloon workers and laughed. She was done caring about the minister's opinions. She had a husband who loved her, children who were thriving, and a future that looked brighter than anything she had imagined possible 6 months ago. Wade moved into Faith's small house with her and the children. It was crowded, but they made it work. Wade continued working at the Morrison Ranch while saving every penny toward buying land. Faith kept working at the Golden Spur for a few more months, determined to contribute to their savings. Together, they scrimped and saved and planned for the future they both wanted. The children adored Wade. He was patient with their endless questions, played games with them in the evenings, and tucked them into bed with stories about his adventures breaking horses and traveling across Texas. Daniel started following him around like a shadow, absorbing everything Wade taught him. Joseph, more reserved, slowly opened up under Wade's gentle attention. Little Mary claimed Wade as her own within days, demanding that he carry her everywhere and calling him Papa, which made Wade's eyes grow suspiciously bright every time. Faith watched her children blossom under Wade's care and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had been so afraid that Thomas's death and the subsequent hardship had damaged them permanently, but they were resilient. With stability and love, they were becoming the happy children they deserved to be, and she was changing too. The hard edges she had developed to survive were softening. She laughed more easily. She slept better at night with Wade's solid warmth beside her. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. In February of 1879, Wade came home from work with news that made Faith's heart race. The Morrison Ranch was selling off some of their land, and Wade had enough saved to make an offer on a 100-acre parcel just north of San Diego. It had a creek running through it, good grass for grazing, and a small cabin that needed work but was livable. Morrison, impressed by Wade's years of loyal service, agreed to sell it to him at a fair price with manageable payments. Faith quit her job at the Golden Spur the same day. Henderson understood, giving her a bonus and telling her she had been the best worker he had ever employed. Several of the regular customers came to say goodbye, thanking her for her kindness and wishing her well. As Faith walked out of the saloon for the last time, she felt a chapter of her life closing. She had survived her darkest days in that place, had found her strength and her courage. Now it was time to move forward. Moving to the ranch was chaos and joy mixed together. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but Wade promised to build an addition as soon as they had the money and time. They spent the first week scrubbing and repairing, making the space livable. Wade worked on the land, building fences and a small barn. Faith planted a garden, determined to grow as much of their food as possible. The children explored every inch of their new home, delighting in the freedom of open space and the creek where they could splash and play. Life on the ranch was hard work, but it was their work. Faith woke each morning beside Wade and went to sleep each night in his arms, and that made every difficulty worthwhile. They worked side by side, partners in every sense. Wade consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valued her opinions, and shared his dreams with her. Faith learned about horses and cattle, developing her own skills and interests. Together, they were building something real and lasting. In April, Faith realized she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening after the children were in bed, suddenly nervous despite their marriage. Wade's reaction erased all her fears. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the small cabin, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, then knelt and pressed a kiss to her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Faith asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Wade said, standing and pulling her close. "You have given me everything I ever wanted, Faith. A home, a family, a purpose. This baby is just more proof that I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Wade became even more protective, trying to prevent Faith from doing heavy work, but she refused to be coddled. She was strong and healthy, and she had work to do. They compromised, with Wade taking on the more strenuous tasks while Faith handled the garden, the cooking, and managing the household. The children were excited about the coming baby, especially Mary, who declared that she wanted a sister. In July, on a Sunday afternoon, Minister Crawford showed up at their ranch. Faith saw him riding up the long drive and felt her spine stiffen. Wade was in the barn and the children were playing by the creek. She walked out to meet the minister, wiping her hands on her apron, determined not to let him see any weakness. "Mrs. Quinlan," Minister Crawford said, dismounting from his horse. His black coat looked absurd in the summer heat and his face was red with exertion. "I have come to speak with you." "Reverend," Faith said coolly, "what brings you all the way out here?" "I have been troubled," the minister said, "about how we parted ways, about the things I said from the pulpit." Faith raised an eyebrow. This was unexpected. "Is that so?" Minister Crawford removed his hat, turning it in his hands. He looked uncomfortable, and Faith found she did not feel sorry for him. "I have been preaching about sin and judgment for many years. I believed I was doing God's work, showing people the error of their ways. But recently I have been questioning whether that is truly the right path." "What changed your mind?" Faith asked, not willing to make this easy for him. Watching you, the minister admitted. You and your husband. You have built a good life here. Your children are thriving. I see you in town sometimes, and you are always kind to people, even those who were unkind to you. And I realized that maybe I had it wrong. Maybe strength and virtue do not look the way I always thought they did. Faith stood silent, waiting for more. Minister Crawford sighed. I called you a sinner, Mrs. Quinlan. I condemned you publicly and used you as an example of everything wrong with this world, but I was wrong. You were a widow trying to feed your children. You chose honest work when you could have chosen other paths. You maintained your dignity and your faith even when I did everything I could to make you feel unwelcome in God's house. I was the one in the wrong, and I owe you an apology. Faith felt Wade's presence behind her before she saw him. He must have heard the visitor and come from the barn. His hand settled on her shoulder, a silent offer of support. She reached up and covered his hand with her own. I appreciate your apology, Reverend, Faith said carefully, but I want you to understand something. What you did, calling me out like that in front of the entire congregation, in front of my children, that caused real harm. You made my life harder when it was already nearly impossible. You used your position of authority to condemn a woman who was doing her best to survive. An apology is a start, but it does not erase that pain. I know, Minister Crawford said quietly, and I do not expect you to forgive me immediately or perhaps ever, but I wanted you to know that I see my mistake now. I have been thinking about my ministry, about what kind of shepherd I want to be. I do not want to be the kind who drives the struggling sheep away. I want to be the kind who helps carry them home. Wade spoke then, his voice measured. Words are easy, Reverend. What matters is what you do going forward, how you treat the next widow, the next person struggling and making hard choices, whether you choose compassion over judgment. You are right, the minister agreed. He looked at Faith again. For what it is worth, I think your husband is correct. You are one of the strongest people I have ever encountered. I wish I had seen that sooner. Wade saw it from the beginning, Faith said, squeezing her husband's hand. That is why he is the man I married. Minister Crawford nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. He put his hat back on and mounted his horse. I will leave you to your Sunday, but I hope in time you might consider returning to church. I promise you will be welcomed, truly welcomed if you do. We will think about it, Faith said, non-committal. After the minister rode away, Wade turned Faith to face him. Are you all right? I am, Faith said, surprised to find it was true. I thought I would be angrier, but mostly I just feel sad for him. He wasted so much time being judgmental when he could have been helping people. He was afraid, Wade said. Afraid of anything that did not fit his narrow view of the world. You scared him because you did not fit the mold, so he tried to break you down to something he could understand. But you would not break. Because I had you, Faith said, rising on her toes to kiss him. You saw me when no one else would. You called me strong when everyone else called me a sinner. You gave me the courage to believe in myself. You always had that courage, Wade countered. I just reminded you it was there. Their baby was born in late November, a healthy boy they named William. Wade cried when he held his son for the first time, and Faith fell even more in love with her husband watching him cradle the tiny infant with such tenderness. Daniel, Joseph, and Mary were fascinated by their new baby brother, taking turns helping care for him under Faith's watchful eye. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Wade's reputation as a horse breaker grew, and people came from all over California to buy horses he had trained. Faith expanded her garden and started raising chickens and selling eggs in town. They added rooms to the cabin, turning it into a proper house. The children grew healthy and strong, learning the value of hard work and the joy of family. and Faith and Wade's love deepened with every passing season, growing from the intense passion of new love into something solid and enduring. In the spring of 1881, Faith and Wade decided to attend church again, but not Minister Crawford's church. A new minister had arrived in San Diego, a younger man named Reverend Thompson, who preached about grace and compassion rather than judgment. His church welcomed everyone, from wealthy ranchers to former saloon workers, and Faith felt at peace there. Minister Crawford heard that they were attending the other church and reportedly said he understood that he had to live with the consequences of his past actions. Faith sometimes ran into people in town who had shunned her during her darkest days. Some apologized. Others pretended nothing had happened. A few still looked down their noses at her. Faith treated them all with polite distance, neither seeking their approval nor particularly caring whether she received it. She had learned that the opinions of judgmental people held no power unless she gave it to them. She had a family who loved her, a home she had helped build, and a husband who thought she was the strongest person he had ever known. That was more than enough. On a warm evening in May of 1882, Faith sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sun set over their land. Wade was beside her, rocking gently in the chair he had built with his own hands. In the distance, they could hear their children's laughter as they played before bedtime. Baby William was asleep in Faith's arms, his tiny hand curled around her finger. Their life was not perfect. There were still hard days, bills to pay, work that never seemed to end. But it was theirs, built on love and mutual respect and the strength they had found in each other. "You ever think about how things might have been different?" Faith asked Wade quietly. "If Minister Crawford's sermon had broken me, if I had given up," Wade reached over and took her free hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think about how glad I am that you did not give up, that you were exactly as strong as I knew you were. And I think about how grateful I am that I got to be part of your story." "Our story," Faith corrected. "We wrote this one together, Wade." "Best story I have ever been part of," Wade said, lifting her hand to kiss her knuckles. "And we are just getting started. We have a lifetime ahead of us, Faith. A lifetime of sunsets like this one, of watching our children grow, of building something that lasts." Faith leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute certainty of his love. Once upon a time, she had been a broken widow condemned by her community, working in a saloon to keep her children fed, called a sinner by a judgmental minister who did not know her heart. But she had survived. She had been strong when strength was the only option she had. And she had found a man who saw that strength, admired it, and loved her not despite her struggles but because of the courage she had shown facing them. "I love you, Wade Quinlan," Faith said, the words coming easily now after years of practice. "I love you too, Faith Quinlan," Wade replied. "More than I have words to say." In the years that followed, Faith and Wade's ranch became known throughout San Diego County. They added more acreage as they were able, eventually expanding to over 300 acres. Wade trained some of the finest horses in California, and Faith became respected for her knowledge of animal husbandry and land management. They had 2 more children, another son and then a daughter, bringing their family to 6 children total. The house expanded again and again, growing into a sprawling ranch house that was always filled with noise and love. Daniel grew up to become a rancher himself, taking over more and more of the operation as Wade got older. Joseph showed an aptitude for business and eventually opened a mercantile in town, becoming one of San Diego's most successful merchants. Mary married a kind man who loved her fierce spirit, and they settled on a neighboring ranch. William and the younger children were still finding their paths, but Faith had no doubt they would thrive with the foundation of love and security they had been given. Minister Crawford, true to his word, had changed his approach to ministry. He never regained Faith's trust or friendship, and she never fully forgave him for the harm he had caused, but she acknowledged that he seemed genuinely committed to being better. He retired eventually, replaced by a succession of ministers who led with compassion rather than condemnation. As Faith entered her 40s and then her 50s, her dark hair turning gray and lines appearing around her eyes, she sometimes thought back to that terrible afternoon when Thomas died, when her life had shattered, and she had thought she might not survive the pieces. She remembered the despair and the fear, the whispers and the judgment. But she also remembered the moment Wade had walked down those church steps and called her courageous. She remembered him sitting in that saloon night after night, seeing her when others looked away. She remembered him calling her the strongest person he had ever known himself, and she remembered learning to believe it was true. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Faith with a party. Their children had organized it, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the county. Faith was overwhelmed by the number of people who came, by the speeches about how much they had accomplished, by the respect and affection in people's eyes. These were not the same people who had judged her all those years ago, or if they were, they had learned better. Faith and Wade had earned their place in the community through years of hard work, integrity, and the kind of love that inspired others. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were in bed, Faith and Wade stood on their porch looking out at the land they had built together. The moon was full, casting silver light across the fields where horses grazed peacefully. In the distance, the ocean glimmered, the same ocean that had witnessed Faith's darkest days and her greatest triumphs. 20 years, Wade said, his arm around Faith's waist. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 20 years of my life, Faith said, meaning every word. You saved me, Wade. No, Wade said firmly, turning her to face him. His hair was graying too, and there were wrinkles around his eyes, but those gray eyes still held the same steady love they always had. You saved yourself, Faith. You had the strength all along. I just had the good sense to see it and the great fortune to convince you to share your life with me. We saved each other then, Faith compromised, reaching up to cup his face. I was drowning and you threw me a rope, but you were lonely too, looking for something to believe in. We found each other when we both needed it most. The minister was wrong about you, Wade said, pulling her close. You were never a sinner, Faith. You were a survivor. You were a mother protecting her children. You were a woman with more courage in your little finger than most men have in their entire bodies. And you were, and are, the love of my life. And you, Faith said, her voice thick with emotion even after all these years, are the man who saw me when I was invisible, who called me strong when everyone else called me shameful, who loved me when I could barely love myself. You gave me everything, Wade. A home, a family, a life worth living. I would not be who I am without you. They kissed then, deep and passionate despite the years, despite the gray hair and the wrinkles and the aching joints. Their love had not dimmed with time. If anything, it had grown richer, layered with shared memories and mutual respect, and the absolute certainty that comes from weathering life's storms together. As they finally pulled apart, Faith rested her head against Wade's chest, listening to his heartbeat. She thought about Minister Crawford's sermon all those years ago, about being called a sinner in front of the whole town. At the time, those words had felt like knives, cutting deep and leaving scars. But now, with the perspective of years and the security of Wade's love, she could see that the minister's judgment said more about him than it ever did about her. She had been strong. She was still strong. Not because she never struggled or never felt fear, but because she faced those struggles and fears head-on. She had done what needed to be done to protect her children. She had worked honestly and maintained her dignity even when others tried to strip it away. She had opened her heart to love again when it would have been safer to stay closed off. And she had built a life, a real life, full of purpose and joy and meaning. "Thank you," Faith whispered against Wade's chest. "For what?" he asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For seeing me, for loving me, for being exactly who you are." "Right back at you," Wade said, kissing the top of her head. "Every single day with you is a gift, Faith. I never forget that." They stood together in the moonlight for a long time. Two people who had found each other in the midst of hardship and judgment, who had built something beautiful from broken pieces. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of horses and the distant ocean. Somewhere in the house, one of their children stirred and then settled back to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new joys. But tonight, they had this moment of perfect peace, and that was everything. Faith Delaney Quinlan had been called a sinner by a minister who did not know her heart. But she had been called the strongest person he had ever known by the cowboy who became her husband, her partner, her great love. And in the end, that was the voice she chose to believe. That was the truth she carried with her through all the years of her life. She was strong. She was worthy. She was loved. And she had built a legacy that would last long after she was gone, a legacy of courage and resilience and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging, bearing witness to their love story. And Faith smiled, knowing that she had lived the life she was meant to live, loved the man she was meant to love, and become the woman she was always capable of being. The minister had been wrong, but the cowboy had been right, and that made all the difference.